Hey guys, welcome back to First and 10 over here on Clueless Gamers. Welcome back. I know it's been a hell of a long time. Literally, it's been almost a month. So if you watch this show, you're probably getting flashback war scenes of last season where our schedule was kind of all over the place. That's, as I usually say, very McVay-like. That's completely my fault. I've been working nonstop. So we're going to try to get some more frequency out here as the season winds up here in 2021. I'm, of course, joined always by my co-host, Brian. Brian, how are you this evening?
I'm doing well. I'm sure a little bit better than you after watching
Way
your
better.
football team tonight, which I'm sure that's what we're going to start with. But boy, that was a tough one to swallow.
Oh yeah, it was. We're gonna talk all about that because it's very fresh in it, and it's been a little while for me. So definitely want to talk about that, guys. Just to always tell you, the description down below is always gonna have timestamps if you want to jump around to different games. This week, we're probably gonna record another session later in the week, so we're not gonna talk picks for next week. We're not going to talk about win-loss records of Brian and I and our pick standings right now. We're just going to talk about kind of the games, particularly this week, that have happened. We're going to talk about 2 or 3 stories that we have really missed that have been important, and some of them have been sad in the NFL. And then Brian and I are going to talk briefly about the game that we went to a couple weeks ago, which I guess will be dubbed the Mike White game for the future of history there. So let's start off, as Brian alluded to tonight's Monday night game. Right now, it's currently 12:26 a.m. here on the East Coast. The game wrapped up about an hour or so ago, about hour and 15 minutes ago. The Los Angeles Rams, went over to San Francisco, went to Santa Clara County, and they got trounced. There's no other way to say it. They got absolutely annihilated, pushed all over the field. Final score 31-10. And for the second straight week, for the second straight primetime game, the Rams are dominated. They are dominated in front of a national audience. This week, we even had the luxury of being on Monday Night Football with Eli and Peyton doing the game. So they got to watch the Stafford throw pick sixes and just a horrible, horrible performance going into the bye. And, Brian, if you give me a second here to just riff a little bit, since we haven't done this in a while. Last week,
Yeah.
I picked them to win. We both did. I was leaning towards the Titans, and I didn't go with my gut, and that's my fault there. But the bottom line is, from this week and last week, even the Cardinals game in week 4, when the Rams play physical teams, and I know the announcers said this all night, but it is so true, though. When they play physical teams that can run it down your throat, can really move you on the offensive line, can do different, defensive stunts on the defensive line and really get to your quarterback, they can't win. So especially on offense, they cannot push people off of the spot, off on the offensive line. They're a finesse team that needs to roll the pocket, and when they don't have that going and they get away from it early because they're throwing interceptions or they're having fumbles and they get away from the run game so the play action doesn't work enough, they're just not the same team. And at the end of the day, when you get into the going to Thanksgiving, into December, into January in playoff football, you're not going to win any games, Bri. You're not going to win a single game in the playoffs if you're not a physical team. And the way it stands right now, sitting at 7-3, this team is clearly not going to have, bar some miracle, going to have the number 1 seed, which means they're going to go on the road, probably to some cold weather team. Maybe it's a Green Bay, maybe even if it's a dome and they go to a Dallas or they go to an Arizona, and they're going to get annihilated. I mean, that's just the bottom line, and I've seen it. I don't know if it's people just trying to hype it up in the media or some analysts or people don't understand really football. And I don't mean to call them out, but I've heard for the last 2 weeks now, since we've last, recorded about a month ago, the Rams made the trade for Von Miller. We now signed free agent Odell Beckham Jr. We obviously lost on Saturday Robert Woods, which we'll talk a little bit more about that, of being a huge loss to the team. And this team seems to be going the very basketball kind of route, or of the old, one of these old NFL teams of a la the Eagles years ago or something like that, where they think if they acquire the most so-called superstars that they'll win the Super Bowl. And that's not how you construct an NFL team. and that's not what wins. And I've been saying this. And Von Miller, you get him. He's an older player. He had a good start to the season, but now he's still recovering from an ankle injury. You give up a second and third round pick for him. And then to sign Odell, which on the surface looks good, but we saw on that first drive what was going on there. Immediately, the Rams trying to get Odell involved, ends up going on a broken play, a pick down the sideline that basically works as a punt. I mean, that's the situation, Bri, that they are in right now, where they're a team that seems to just be collecting every big-name free agent over the last few years, going all in. And I've seen every analyst going, well, now this team, this Los Angeles Rams team, is the team to beat. No, they're not. Wake up. They're not. I'm sorry. Did you not watch them get blown off of their home field by the Arizona Cardinals in Week 4? Did you not watch the Titans game or this game against San Francisco tonight? I just don't understand how you can look at that. I mean, look at this team, Bri. Who have they beaten that you say can be there at the end? The Bucs, who are struggling in their own right, and we'll get to that in a little bit. And I believe they'll correct it with the GOAT Tom Brady. But that's their only impressive win of the season out of the 7, Bri. Every other win has been against bottom feeder, below 500 teams, and they just lost to a below 500 team for the 5th straight time. Do you know that they have not beaten Kyle Shanahan and the San Francisco 49ers since week 17 of the 2018 season? Did you know that? Because I think that's eluding them, that fact that Kyle Shanahan absolutely owns McVay. He owns him in head-to-head. He owns him in schemes and game plans. I told tonight the people I was with, I said, I'll tell you the game plan right now of exactly what is going to happen, that the San Francisco 49ers are going to win this game. They're going to pass on overwhelmingly crossing routes over the middle. They're going to feed Deebo Samuel on those routes, and including having him run out of the backfield. They're going to pound the ball with whoever the running back is in Kyle Shanahan's system, because even if it doesn't work against other teams, no matter how many running back injuries they have, it will always work against the Los Angeles Rams. And then they will throw in the red zone to George Kittle. That is their entire game plan every single time. And I think before I turn it over to you, Bri, the cinching moment of the night, the one that says, I own you, 4th and 6, when you're already up big, the Niners go for it, score on a 40-yard touchdown. I mean, if that doesn't say supreme confidence from Kyle Shanahan to look at McVay across the sideline and go, I own you, I mean, I don't know what does. So, Bri, after that rant there, I'll turn it over to you. I mean, what was your impressions of the Rams, honestly, tonight and even last week?
Well, first of all, I should have listened to you better as far as picking against the Rams when they're facing the 49ers, because, you've been educating me and everyone who listens on this show about that for the last 2 years. And once again, you're proven correct. So props to you for that, even though I'm sure you're not happy, of course, about that.
Hurts.
But as far as, listen, the team, you can't say many good things about their performance the last 2 weeks. It's certainly a terrible way to go into the bye week, especially when they were 7-1. And the Tennessee game, what particularly stands out is how the Titans played without Derrick Henry. I mean, when we heard that he was lost for the season, the analysis was, well, that takes away the Titans to have any chance of doing anything big this year. And it wasn't just a beating, it was a pounding in that game without Derrick Henry. So that was real concerning, especially coming at home. And then the game tonight, the thing that just stood out to me was the sloppiness on offense. I mean, look, Jimmy Garoppolo did not light it up for the 49ers, but as you talked about, it was the running backs, down to 4th and 5th string on the depth chart. They didn't exactly chew up yardage, but they just kind of grinded him out, and they did enough, and Garoppolo made plays when he needed to. We found Kittle in the end zone, as you said there. That was going to be part of the game plan. But offensively, with the Rams, I mean, how many drops did we see? Early in this game, you go to Higbee on a little screen pass. It looks like it's going to be a nice gain. Ball goes through his hands, picked off for a touchdown the other way. I mean, those are plays that you cannot have And not to mention Higbee's other drop on what was a third and medium. There
Yep.
was nobody near him, wide open, just flat drops the ball. So obviously it was a tough night for him, even though he scored the only touchdown. But I just saw far too many, miscommunication, as you talked about on the Beckham play, drops even by Cup on a key third down, which is very uncharacteristic for him, even though he still had a good night overall. But I just felt watching them, they were not crisp. Too many mistakes, too many drop passes, and they got owned. Let's face it, as you put it.
Yep, they absolutely did. There's no other way to talk about this. And listen, I'm part because we're here in New Jersey and there's not a lot of Ram fans out here, and most of them usually, if you come across them, they're bandwagoners in the last 5 years. I'm sorry to say it, but that's usually the case. But I'm part of a Rams Facebook group online, right? And it's a lot of passionate people, including myself. And I see in there all the time when I try to say these things, and I won't even say educate. I'm just saying calling out facts. They characterize me as a pessimist. That you don't want. I want this team to win more than anything. I bleed the blue and gold. I'm there for this team. I want to see them succeed. It makes me sad every time that they lose, especially when they lose in this way. But at some point, you have to face facts and hear me. If you're in that group, if you're in my real life, if maybe honestly, if you're one of these so-called experts on Twitter or on TV, this team is not Super Bowl bound. I'll say that again. They're not Super Bowl bound. They are an overhyped, big market team. Now, are you going to say out there, listener, Pete, are you saying they're not going to make the playoffs? No, they're going to make the playoffs. But are you going to honestly tell me that it doesn't absolutely depend on who they're playing in the first round of the playoffs and the wild card? Because I'm telling you right now, most of these teams, let's say Arizona, let's say they get the number 1 seed. They play the Packers. They win in that game? No. They play the Cowboys. They win in that game? No. I mean, who are they honestly going to win a game against if you get in to the playoffs? The Bucks? You think they're going to repeat and go to Tampa and be able to win there? Absolutely not. It's not good enough for a team that has literally, I believe, 1 draft pick coming up here in the next draft, has done a masterful job of manipulating the cap, but has gone all in on the present. A lot of guys on 1-year deals or have options to get out of contracts. And that's what you do? Who have you beaten? Because, Brian, I want to make people aware, if they're not already. The Rams, here after the bye, they go up to Lambeau. Does anyone honestly think they're going to win that game if Aaron Rodgers is playing? I don't. Okay, the next week they get the Jags, which they should win that game, but you never know. We've seen the Jags beat Buffalo a couple weeks ago, right? Let's say they get that one. They still got to play the Seahawks, a division opponent with Russell Wilson back, and, he'll be thriving and back in rhythm a little bit more. They got to play this San Francisco team again. They have to play Arizona in Glendale, in Arizona Stadium again, and they got to play the Ravens. I mean, when you hear that, is there any one of those, maybe besides the Jags, that you're confident this team is going to win? I'm not. I mean, are you?
That's a tough schedule. That is a tough schedule.
It just, I think they are, unfortunately, and I hope I am dead wrong, and you guys can, rip me apart in the comments a few weeks from now. I want that more than anything. But I'm telling you, this team is in for a downward, horrific spiral here in the second half. Would not be surprised, and I'm dead serious, if they end up going 9-8, 10-7. I mean, they are in for a absolute spiral coming up here. They're not good enough against a lot of these teams. They're just not. And I'm sick to my stomach on, at some point, McVay, I believe in McVay, but he doesn't make enough in-game adjustments. It's just, I haven't watched his press conference after this. I will when this podcast is over. I guarantee he says the same things of, it's on me. I didn't put our guys in a good enough position to win this game. Bullshit. I'm sorry, Sean. Bullshit. You got outcoached once again, and a little fact before we go to the next game here, the Rams in the McVay era and the Kyle Shanahan era for San Francisco have never beaten Kyle Shanahan when Garoppolo has started a football game. Have never, ever beaten the Niners if he is starting a game. That is absolutely a recipe for disaster. It's just, I can't express how disappointed I am. And then you couple that with Saturday's news, just on a random jet sweep in practice. Robert Woods, Rams wide receiver, steps the wrong way, ends up, he thinks he's fine, finishes the rest of practice, does the press conferences, does a MRI as just a precaution, reveals that he tore his ACL for the year. And that man, as I said on Twitter, is the glue of that offense. He does all the dirty work in the run game and blocking and carrying out of the backfield. Odell ain't doing that job. And that is going to hurt just like the Cup injury 3 years ago hurt. And Brian, to the day, 1 day off, exactly 3 years ago from when the news got announced on Saturday that Robert Woods was out, 1 day off 3 years ago in week 10, Cup tore his ACL. How about that?
Oof.
I mean, that is just spooky stuff. And that team went to the Super Bowl that year. This team ain't making it to the Super Bowl. Not the way they're currently constructed and playing right now. So
yeah, I just want to go back to one point before we go on to some other games. That I agree with about how you construct a roster and how they forfeited so many draft picks to for all these big splashy quote unquote free agent signings, and I'm with you. I just don't think that's how you build a roster. And like, it's all well and good to bring in the Von Millers of the world in a trade, but people like Odell Beckham, that's a player who has to prove that he can play on a winning team. Because what winning team has he been on? He was on all losing teams with the Giants and the Browns. I mean, they made the playoffs, but it wasn't much because of him. He wound up getting hurt. That's kind of when they took off after he got hurt. Yep. So he has to prove that, he can be a part of a winning type culture, and obviously this was not a good starter. Now he's going to have the bye week, as he said. I just heard some of his comments to get a better feel for the playbook, and maybe he's able to make more of an impact. But overall, when I saw that, I was like, I don't think this helps much. And certainly the loss of Robert Woods, as you documented how big that is, even though he's not having as big of a yardage season and catching the ball and target as much, the dirty work that he does, being a core guy, that's a tough guy to replace, really difficult. Yeah. And like you said, Beckham doesn't replace that, and that adds to their problems.
Yeah, and he is named a team captain for a reason. The guys respect him. He knows the playbook in and out. He knows what Sean McVay is trying to do. And, he had some issues early in the season. He just wanted to be fed more. I think it was more just making them aware that, hey, let's not make this so Cup-centric. A lot of people characterized it as complaining. I didn't think that. He's not that type of guy. And those two love each other and they work together well. And that loss is going to hurt just like the Cup loss in 2018, where the team kind of started to spiral after he was lost in Week 10. I think we're in, as Ram fan here and as other Ram fans, if I'm speaking to out there, we're in for a really difficult ride here. And now, yes, do I hope I eat my words coming out of the bye and we beat the Packers up in Lambeau? Sure. Now talk to me in 2 weeks. If that happens, okay, now our mindset is a little bit corrected. I'm having a little bit more hope with this team. But right now, what shows you that they're going to be able to do that, and it's going to be even worse coming off of a bye, going to probably lose three in a row. It's bad times here right now, and I do not want to see another analyst for the rest of this season talk about how this team is a top echelon team. They are not at all. Let's get off some of that, and let's talk about some real life news here. Some stories that we've missed that are not great, and we'll get to the games here of this week and stuff like that in a few minutes. But I feel like we'd be remiss to not talk about some of these major issues going on that happen in the NFL, the big stories. One of them is obviously one of the saddest stories we've heard in quite a long time, and I'm talking about former Las Vegas Raider Henry Ruggs, the wide receiver. He made some ill-advised decisions, some dangerous and downright stupid decisions a few weeks ago. He got drunk one night in Las Vegas, which is always something that people talked about. If you put a team in Vegas, these things can be more, the city of sins there, Sin City, that these things could end up popping up more. And he ended up getting clocked at a top speed and driving in his car, double over the legal limit of alcohol, clocked a top speed of 156 miles an hour. And he ended up hitting someone at a red light in the back. Unfortunately, that woman and her dog both passed away, which is something you never want to hear when someone's minding their own business, is doing nothing about living their life, was reportedly only a few minutes away from her apartment, maybe was going home, and his poor decisions cost someone their life, and in turn, to a lesser degree to talk about, he cost himself his own life. He's right now facing up to about 40 years in prison on multiple accounts. He also had a loaded gun in the passenger seat that was discovered when he was brought in. And if the Raiders couldn't have more things keep going wrong with them lately, this was another one after the Gruden incident that we talked about last month. And just a heartbreaking thing that you never want to hear to all parties involved, particularly, obviously, the young woman that lost her life there. You hurt two families, you take someone's life that you can never get that back. Making a decision is ridiculous and inexcusable in this day and age, especially that you're an NFL football player and all the money you pay someone to watch you, to drive you. There's Uber, there's Lyft, there's regular taxis, I'm sure, in Las Vegas. I mean, there's a number of ways to not have an excuse to get behind the wheel, and his poor decision ended up, away from the football stuff, because who cares about that, ended up taking someone's life. So, Bri, obviously horrific, tragic news that we missed when that broke about a couple weeks ago, but do you have any thoughts that you wanted to say on that unfortunate situation?
Yeah, I mean, very unfortunate, obviously, and as you said, just adds to all the trouble that the Raiders have had. I mean, the one thing I'll say positively from the Raiders' standpoint is that dealing with the Gruden stuff and with Ruggs, and by the way, another player, Damon Arnett, who was a first-round pick,
Yep.
and he came out posting a video threatening someone with a weapon in his hand. So that was just yet another thing
He got
going
cut
on with
as well
them.
by the Raiders as well.
Right. So, and that's two first-round picks in recent years that have been jettisoned from the roster, and
Yep.
rightfully so. And even with that, they have a winning record. I mean, it's only 5-4, and they have lost their last two, and were blown out. Which we'll get to the Chiefs game, because that's certainly one to discuss. But they've, at least you'd say, kept their heads above water. I mean, they were in first place in the division going into the game last night, a division where nobody's really asserted themselves. But as far as Ruggs, we just seem to see these kind of things too often in the NFL. Players making poor choices, poor judgment, and it just shows that, you can have all the talent in the world. Ruggs, a great college player at Alabama, it's drafted in the first round. He's got burning speed. I mean, he's an electrifying player to watch, and something like this happens, and you don't know what the future holds for your career. So it's just unfortunate all the way around.
Yeah, I would say his career is 100% over. I would say he's in for a rough rest of his life, which, I mean, honestly, well deserved. I mean, you make a decision like that and cost someone else their life. I don't really honestly have any sympathy for you. There's no excuse for that, and you could put your arms around him and try to have him rehab from that and understand his mistakes and maybe work the rest of his life to kind of make up for doing something like that as much as you possibly can. But for anyone out there listening, if it's not apparently obvious, once again, do not be under the influence of anything, especially something like alcohol or any hard drugs, and get behind the wheel. There's just, in this day and age especially, there is no excuse, and it's just it's a sad situation all around. And the football side of it, which we'll get to a little bit more, man, God bless Derek Carr, man. I mean, all the things that he's been dealing with in the last month to even keep that team above water is something that needs to be commended. But we'll talk more about that game last night. The other story, not as sad, thankfully, but maybe equally as stupid, if I dare so say, was the stuff going up in Green Bay about a week and a half ago with Aaron Rodgers. I'm sure most of you out there know the situation, but in case you don't, or do you want to hear my perspective and Brian's perspective on it, we'll talk about it for a few minutes. We're not a political podcast. We're not here to talk about medical terms and all this other stuff. But from a person standpoint and from a football standpoint, we can talk about that. And Aaron Rodgers gets revealed. He's unvaccinated. He got diagnosed with COVID. He had symptoms. Apparently, they weren't terrible. At least that's what he said to the public on the Pat McAfee show. But this created a massive stir, and it created a massive stir not because he didn't have the shot, but because it looks like, and I would say outright, despite what he tried to claim on the Pat McAfee show the first time he went on, he outright lied, Bri, about his situation, his status, so he didn't have to follow some of the protocols, which one of them includes wearing a mask at a press game conference, a mask after the game when you were talking to other players, maybe not hosting a Halloween party at your house with fellow teammates and some other people, and being public about that and posting yourself in your John Wick outfit while you're not following league protocols, no matter how you feel about them. The rules are the rules. And it ended up costing his team a game, and ultimately could play huge down the stretch of costing them the number 1 seed as they went over to Kansas City last week. Kansas City did really not play that well, especially offensively. Win 13-7. Jordan Love looked very lost. And to me, I think it's pretty clear if Rodgers was in that game, they were easily going to win the way Mahomes was playing that week. So a weird kind of just dumb situation of him like attacking and making it political on the Pat McAfee show, which was of course where he's comfortable doing these big, interviews, and great for the Pat McAfee show. But I watched the whole 47-minute interview, and just left my head. I was scratching my head leaving it, thinking that this guy was, in Aaron Rodgers, was a little bit smarter than he was portraying himself. And we won't get into all the other weird stuff and things he tried to make excuses for. But, I mean, did you see any of the interview, Bri? What did you take away from that situation? I mean, just a strange thing going on.
Yeah, well, I think the thing to remember with Rodgers is not just with the vaccine, but there have been some weird things going on with him and the Packers now, going back to the start of this past offseason. So, I mean, he's always been a little bit of a diva, let's face it. I mean, I think the relationship with the previous head coach and Mike McCarthy really soured by the end, and who knows what his relationship is like with the current coach, LaFleur. But he just, at times, he strikes you as kind of a weird guy. And there was talk what his future was going to hold, not just with the Packers, but with football. He went and ventured out as a guest host of Jeopardy and really thought he was one of the candidates to actually take that job.
Yeah, which was insane that he actually thought that.
I know. So there were really just a lot of things going on with him. Now, he did sort of backtrack some of the comments that he said. I did hear him say that he realizes he is a public figure and shouldn't have come out with some of the comments that he did. So I'll give him a small degree of credit for that. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, the big problem was the clip I'm sure that you saw where he was asked straight up if he was vaccinated. I think it was probably during preseason. And he said, yeah, I'm immunized. So he just completely led people astray. It was a lie.
He outright intentionally was trying to mislead the media.
Right. And I think that seems to be part of his agenda with this whole thing. So it's hard to make of, what Rodgers is thinking and what his future holds. I'm just glad that for him it was only a 1-game absence, because watching football is better when he's on the field. I mean, as we know, he's one of the best in the game. Absolutely. And I think probably the most important player to his team than anyone. I would make that case.
Yeah.
And as you put it, it was abundantly clear in the game that he missed, where the Packers, if they had done anything right in that game, probably would have won. But they made so many mistakes, and Jordan Love did not look like a competent quarterback, and so the results were the results.
Yeah, like I said at the top of this, it's not our place, and I'm not going to turn this podcast into some political kind of debate, town hall. But from a football and from a rules standpoint, no matter how much he tried to rail on the protocols and them not making sense, man, the protocols are the protocols, man. And if that's what we all have, everyone listening, you, we all are hopefully or are working jobs. How many times, Bri, have you gone into a job that you think, well, that rule's kind of dumb, that doesn't make a lot of sense, but you do it anyway because the rules are the rules and your management or your bosses or anyone asks you to do them? And for him to think that just because, oh, he's a high touting player in the NFL, I can do whatever I want. I can mislead the media if I want. That is where I more lose respect for him. His personal choice is his personal choice. I respect that. He could do what he wants, sure. But to think that, like, you outright lied to everyone out there, I think that's where I'm hung up on. That's where you think you know better than the NFL or these doctors to not follow the protocols, and you end up hurting your team. That's kind of where I'm hung up on. I just think that was not a smart decision for him, where it could be his last year in Green Bay. He's chasing that Super Bowl to get back to you again, and now you potentially cost yourself a number 1 seed just not following the rules.
Right, and you compare how he handled his situation to how Ben Roethlisberger handled his with the Steelers, and it was a night and day difference. And that's not to say Ben Roethlisberger is a saint, because as we know, he's not. He's had a lot of mistakes in his career. But with this particular situation, to self-report the symptoms that he had, get tested, wound up getting the positive test, he misses the one game, everything worked a lot more smoothly, even though the Steelers went out there and tied against the Detroit Lions, which that's beside the point. But how he handled the situation is how you'd like to see most guys handle it.
Yeah, and I think from a PR standpoint, finally, to talk about, it wasn't a great look for the NFL. It wasn't a great look for the Packers. You never want to see one of your major marketable stars who's on 1,000 commercials, having a controversy like this, and then he lost, obviously, a smaller sponsorship local in Green Bay that is all about health. It was a health clinic. It makes sense why they dropped him. We get that situation. And now the Packers get briefly fined. Rodgers gets briefly fined, chump change to a lot of these organizations and him personally. He was charged a little over $14,000. And now we'll try to move on from that, and hopefully he can take it more seriously, and any other guys who think about or were doing this can maybe think about following the protocols a little bit more, because at the end of the day, we want everyone to be safe, we want everyone to be healthy, and we want to see the best players play on Sunday and any other primetime game. We don't want to have to be watching, no offense to Jordan Love, but Jordan Love, if he's not ready playing a game like that on a big televised game, we want to watch the best guys compete against each other and just do your part in at least following the protocols and having the best chance to be out there on a Sunday. That's kind of all I'll say on that. But the one thing I did want to just say to you, how messed up was that by Kansas City that they put Jordan Love's family on the last row? Did you see that? On the last row of the stadium in Arrowhead? I mean, that had to be intentional, right?
That was, and the funny thing was, is like the camera cuts to them, and normally, when they show family of players in the stands, particularly when they're making, either their debut or whatever it may be, they're, filled with joy. It's just an absolutely most joyful experience possible. And the family members of his were as glum as could be. It was just really not what you usually see, but way up in the last row, you really can't make that up.
I was just incredible. All right, guys. So we talked about some stories here. Let's go into some games, and connected to last week, we're going to talk about this week here, but connected to last week. Last week, I just wanted to briefly mention what a week for everyone in terms of horrible betting, us and our picks.
Yeah.
NFL teams, was upset galore last week. Insane. The Falcons, Saints, okay, you could see that being a coin flip game, sure. The Broncos annihilating the Cowboys, I don't think anyone's seen that coming. And then to have the Bengals, the way they were playing, get owned by the Browns, and that means even more, because we'll talk about what the Browns did this past week. The Jags beating the Bills 9-6. That was an insane one. The Giants upset the Raiders. The Chiefs barely winning there against the Packers. The Chargers barely won against the Eagles. But then I would say an upset, considering that the Cardinals, no Hopkins, no Kyler Murray, who this past week just missed his second consecutive game, thoroughly dominated the Niners, which we'll talk more about that. I think is more, again, an indictment on what the Rams did tonight, that the backups of the Cardinals could beat the Niners last week, but then you get owned the next week. But here nor there. We talked about the Titans-Rams game, and then the Steelers trying to give the game away in the fourth quarter where it seemed like the refs were almost against the Chicago Bears. That was a strange week. I say all that to say this week we kick it off Thursday Night Football, and the Dolphins, a double digit in some betting areas, underdog to the Baltimore Ravens, and they thoroughly basically dominate the game. I mean, starting off the week, Bri, I mean, what'd you think about the Thursday night game in Miami?
Yeah, well, I mean, like you said, with last week and all the upsets, and I think what it really shows is how much parity there is in the game right now, where we're seeing so many last place teams match up with division leaders and win. And I feel like it's happening more than ever before. But yeah, Thursday night was just yet another case of that. I mean, you looked at that game going in and you said, oh, the Ravens should handle them easily. But again, Thursday night is really a big advantage for the home team. I think that's something that we've seen in the history of Thursday night football. And I think now there are real reasons to be concerned about the Ravens because I feel like it's almost too much on Lamar Jackson's shoulders. He did not have a good
Absolutely.
performance on Thursday, but this defense is not doing him any favors. I mean, they
No.
barely slipped by the Vikings the previous week at home. That was a game you thought they'd handle easily. But their pass defense in particular is giving up
Well,
way
remember
too
the
many
issues
big
the issues
plays.
they had against Indianapolis, even though Lamar put on his superhero cape in that game and ultimately won in overtime. That defense was atrocious against Carson Wentz.
Yeah, and it's had too many games like that. And Miami is not scoring points against anybody this year, and has Jacoby Brissett starting. Tua, of course, comes on in relief, made a couple big plays late,
That
but
was
for
fascinating, wasn't it? That he doesn't start the
yeah,
game because of his finger, but he's very much a la Jared Goff last season. But then he's able to come into the game and he looked relatively fine. That was strange.
yeah, and the Ravens, what I think it really comes down to is the injuries are starting to catch up to them
Oh
because we
yeah.
talked about right from the outset of the season how thin they were at running back and slowly but surely all the guys they've lost on defense. And as good of a coach as John Harbaugh is and as good as Lamar Jackson is, I just think they've lost too many pieces and to me don't look like a team that's equipped to make a big run now in the playoffs, and that's something that I probably wouldn't have said a couple weeks ago.
No, I completely agree. I still think the Lamar factor, they are dangerous, right? Like I could see them going on a run, getting hot, maybe getting a little bit healthier. To me, the issue, yes, you touched on the defense. It's the running game. The running game, this team is, remember, tied the NFL record before a few weeks ago of having the most consecutive games of having 100 rush yards. And they once again they've been struggling to run the ball. I mean, let's look at some numbers. The leading rusher on Thursday night was Lamar, 9 for 39. Devontae Freeman
Hmm.
went 10 for 35. Devin Duvernay had 1 for 19. Le'Veon Bell, 3 yards, 1 carry. I mean, they're just not running the ball. And this team works off the play action, the way their receivers are, the way someone like Hollywood Brown can take time to get into his route and get down the field. They need to be able to run the ball. And this offensive line has not created enough holes, and all the injuries they've had at the running back position, as you alluded to, have severely caught up to them. And they're asking Lamar every single week to put on a Superman cape and go out there and carry this piss poor defense and carry this run game then that's non-existent and carry receivers dropping the ball. And it's just not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. That's not the way that Lamar can play the best when he has to kind of get away from his athletic skill set and now be restricted to a complete pocket passer that has to throw it 40, 50 times a game. It's just not a recipe to win, especially against a Miami team that 4 days earlier plays a horrific game where they won against that might be honestly, I don't know if you watch any of that game, Bri, or any of the so-called highlights against the Texans. That might be the worst game of the year. I mean, that game had 9 total turnovers. That was a horrible game to watch. They had 5 turnovers 4 days earlier, and they're able to beat the Ravens like that. It's just, there's so much parity, as you said. There's not a single team in this league in either conference. Can you say any team right now? Yeah, they're Super Bowl bound. They look like the best of the best. Not a single one for me.
No, and I mean one that I could make the case for would be the Cowboys, but then we saw their game, like you talked about, as one of the upsets last week with Denver. I mean, when they've been at their best, they look like they could be that kind of team, and certainly they were on Sunday, which I'm sure we'll get to in a little bit. But yeah, I mean, like you thought Arizona starting 7-0, whatever it may have been, that they were on their way, but then they had some issues, lost to the Packers and losing Kyler Murray. So it's true. You think one team is good, and then they wind up getting blown out by a team that you think they should handle, and it's just been that kind of year.
Yeah, and that's a thing to talk about even as we just transition into the Sunday games. If we go to that Arizona game, right, I thought it was very impressive that they were with Colt McCoy, were able to thoroughly dominate the 49ers, which I said is more, once again, an indictment on the Los Angeles Rams. But they were able to dominate them with a backup QB, no Hopkins. I know Watt wasn't giving a lot to this team, but still his presence not there in the middle as he is out for the year. And then to turn it around this week and to have Kyler and Hopkins missing again, and a Panthers team that has been so up and down, has an issue at quarterback with a hurt quarterback that it looks like they're kicking Sam Darnold right out the back door. And then PJ Walker here plays really well. You have a little bit of spice there of re-signing Cam Newton. You could just see the energy that he brought on the sidelines. He ends up accounting for 2 touchdowns there. I'm sure he'll be starting for this team in the coming weeks. But a little note to talk about, Bri, is if you've watched Kyler Murray over the last couple of years, he's electric. He's amazing. I think he was up there for an MVP candidate right there before he got hurt. But he gets a lot of these little nicks and dings and injuries. We saw this last season, if people remember, when the Cardinals were out of the playoffs. He was dinged at the end of the year. They didn't know if he was going to play the final game of the season against the Rams, where John Wolford was starting. He plays about a quarter, and then he goes out of that game and was injured. He is a smaller guy, and when he's not protecting himself and he's taking all these hits, or against the Packers, he's trying to run out there at the at kind of the end of the game or so, he gets his ankle twisted up a little bit on. That is something to keep an eye on, because this team absolutely needs him to make a run where I very well believe, even though it hurts me to say, this, you could say when everything's right and everyone's healthy, this is the best team in football. And that ain't going to happen if he keeps having all these nagging little injuries and not protecting himself. I mean, what did you take away from what's been going on with him with the injury the last couple of weeks? And what did you take away from the Panthers getting a win, kind of floating around that 7 seed now in the NFC, and the return of Cam Newton?
Yeah, a lot to unpack there. I mean, with Cam Newton, it surprised me and it didn't. I mean, it made sense that they would bring someone in with the Darnold injury, and obviously he was playing just atrocious football. But when I saw Cam Newton back to Carolina, it's like, yeah, it makes for a good story, but how much impact will it really have? Because we saw Cam Newton at the end of his first go-round in Carolina, his year in New England. He didn't look like the same player, certainly not the MVP player that he was when he took the team to the Super Bowl. So I don't really know exactly how good Cam Newton is anymore. I mean, I guess he could be okay. Of course, he didn't start in the game on Sunday, but came in on like goal line packages, had a couple touchdowns. They say he's going to start now this upcoming week, which interestingly enough comes against Washington and his old head coach, Ron Rivera. Yeah. But I did not at all expect Arizona to lose that game, especially on the heels of beating San Francisco the way they did, as you discussed. So I thought going back home, yeah, even with Colt McCoy there, quarterbacking, I figured Arizona would play well enough to get a win, not lose whatever it was, 34-10. I mean,
you at least expected them to play better even if they lost.
Yeah, so that's the thing that really stood out, is how poor of a performance that was. But from Carolina's perspective, what a strange year it's been. To start 3-0 and to think Darnold's found his new home, but I mean, did things just turn on a dime for Darnold in the poor direction, let's just say? I mean, some of the games, watching that game against New England, some of the throws for pick sixes, and some of his stat lines where you're seeing, completion percentage of like 40%, like 3 interceptions. I feel for Darnold, because I really thought he had kind of turned a corner and got a fresh start with a change of scenery. But unfortunately, it just looks like it's going to be a long road to anything for him, if there even is any kind of NFL future.
I would say if he has an NFL future, at this point until he proves himself, it's going to be unfortunately as a backup. And
Yeah.
I would say he's all but done in Carolina. I mean, I think that is pretty clear given the situation that they bring in Cam, that PJ Walker's there. You saw that scene last week where I don't know if you caught it, where Robbie Anderson was yelling at him on the sidelines. Like, they don't believe in him. He's just not that alpha guy that's there. And at the end of the day, it just hasn't held up. This is his fourth season now. I just looked it up here. And his career completion percentage is 59.7%. You can't be passing
Yeah, it's
below
not good
60%
enough.
in the NFL.
Yeah.
It doesn't cut it. And when you're sitting at 52 touchdowns to 50 interceptions, I mean, that's a recipe to get you in street clothes and you're having another job, and football is not it. And, I did caution, and I think we both did in the first 3 weeks of the season, Carolina was playing a lot of bottom feeders. So we had to see what they were going to do against the real teams. And as soon as they played Dallas, who I would consider a real team, we've seen the downward spiral. But at the end of the day, there's still, if they could get it right, that defense has been underrated this season. I think has been playing really, really well. Burns, I think, has been outstanding despite whatever Mac Jones trying to break his ankle last week. And I think they could still hover around that 6-7 seed. They're right there right now. So be fascinating to see what Cam does next week and how that team looks going forward. And can Christian McCaffrey ultimately stay healthy? I think that's the cinch, the linchpin in that offense. If he ain't there, they ain't going far. Alluding to next week's game and talking about the team that Carolina is going to play, let's talk about the Washington football team. They welcomed in the Tampa Bay Bucks. Tampa Bay Bucks coming off a bye. Remember the week before that was the game where they lost again in the regular season to the New Orleans Saints. The whole pick six there at the end. The Saints just seemed to have the Bucks number. And you could say, well, Pete, they beat them in the playoffs. They actually were dominating Brady for a lot of that and were playing really well. It was almost like Breeze and the offense had, I believe, like 4 turnovers that really changed that game for the way it was going. And, Washington, biggest win of the year, I would say. It comes on the heels of horrible news. Chase Young, their star, defensive end, tears his ACL. He's out for the year. It seemed like in the last couple of days we've had a lot of guys here out for the year. As we also said, Robert Woods for the Rams. And, the Washington, this game was a little bit closer than people think, and ultimately it came down to time of possession, and that end of the game there, I don't know if you caught this, Bri, the longest time of possession drive of the season, 19 plays, over 10 minutes by the Washington football team, concluding with a game-clinching touchdown to beat Tampa, drop them to their second straight loss. What was your takeaway in the game here, and what's going on with the Bucs? Is it just, hey, they'll get out of this slump, or do we see this as something more? Brady, another 2 picks in this game.
Yeah, well, as from our first show of the new season, I wasn't as nearly as high on the Bucks as you and many others were. So to see them struggling for a couple games to me is not a huge surprise, and I think ultimately they're going to end up being okay. But there are some warning signs from those 2 games where it's like both sides of the ball, what's going on here? And, we know they've had some key injuries on defense. I think that's taken its toll. Offensively, Brady's had a lot of games where he's looked, like 30-year-old Tom Brady. So I don't think these last couple of games lead me to believe, oh, this is now the end, which we thought we've seen that a couple times, and what always happens is he proves us wrong. So I'm not going to make too big of a deal for the Bucks. For Washington, it was good that their defense finally showed up, because I think coming into the year we thought this would probably be one of the better defenses in the league.
Absolutely.
And that has not been the case this year. Now, obviously, that's going to get a lot harder not having Chase Young for the rest of the season. But for once, they did actually stifle a pretty good offense, obviously, in the Bucks. So you give them credit there. And on that final drive that you alluded to, before the touchdown, that key play, the third down conversion to Terry McLaurin, which I'm sure you saw, the difficult catch he made while taking a ferocious hit on a play over the middle
Yeah.
where there were not many receivers that would hold on to that ball, and that's one of the many reasons what makes him such a good player. There's a lot of good receivers out there, but how many can make the tough catches when the game is in the balance like that? That was a huge key for Washington.
Yeah, it was a fantastic catch. If you don't know that guy's name by now, you're not watching football. He's one of the best receivers we have in the game. And honestly, I thought that was really on Heineke. He kind of let his receiver out to dry there. I thought that was a questionable ball location of where he was going, considering that he can see the defender that's driving on him. He really could have opened up McLaurin, thankfully so, to a serious injury there, at least a concussion. So he's got to do a better job there. But yeah, a great job holding on to the ball. A fantastic drive, the best and the longest we've seen so far this season to close out the game. And I know the time of possession is what people want to go to. It was, about like basically 40-20 and how it kind of worked out. I think it was like 39-21. But when the Bucks had the ball, they couldn't move it. Now, yeah, one of the picks was not really Brady's fault. It kind of, you could question, all right, maybe he shouldn't have thrown it there, but when he throws to that young kid, that rookie that they had, what is his name, Darden, and he kind of pops up in the air. Is it a fumble? Is it a pick? Okay, but the second one was really bad. I don't even know where he was going with that, and without kind of that Evans breakaway touchdown, he didn't look comfortable. He for a guy that was not pressured really at all in the game. I think Washington only had like one sack. To just not be confused by coverages or not get in the flow of it. You can't just blame it on, Gronk isn't there, AB isn't there. Well, this team still has Fournette and Bernard in the backfield and Evans and Godwin. And there's a lot of good players on this team. And you have the GOAT, of course. It's something that I think they'll right the ship a little bit, but it does. I'm not saying Brady's done, because I'm absolutely not saying that, but the pieces around him and not being able to run the football, I think is going to become a concerning part here. Is the rest? They have to fix that run game and get some of that smash mouth football and that defense hunting again, because that defense has been very injured and is also, much like Washington's defense, has massively underachieved this season.
Yeah, and they're just one of a bunch of teams in the NFC that you could make a case, as we talked about earlier. Who would you put as the favorite for the Super Bowl? I mean, I feel like you could list 6 to 8 teams,
Everyone.
even in the NFC, who have a chance to make a run in the playoffs, and the Bucks are one of them. But there's going to be a lot of competition there, so the playoffs this year are going to really be very interesting to watch. Even the second half of this regular season, because of how close these divisions are, is going to be fascinating to watch.
Absolutely. Brian, since we're running a little long here on time, let's just get to a couple more games here. And we're, of course,
Yeah.
guys, we'll be back here later this week. Don't worry, we're going to have all the picks here coming up for week 11, but let's just wrap up here in week 10. I think we have to mention, just because, you let me and you guys out there dealt with me ranting about the Rams. I'll give you the floor here for a couple minutes if you want to talk about the Jets-Bills game. Bills end up winning 45-17. Mike White gets another start coming off of his early exit against Indianapolis on Thursday night. Throws 4 picks. I mean, where are you kind of on that situation and where the Jets are right now?
Well, I mean, we should talk just briefly, too, that we were at probably the game that was the highlight of the season for the Jets. Yeah, I mean, the Mike White became an instant folk hero after that 34-31 win against Cincinnati, which just feels so long ago now, considering the 2 performances since the Thursday nighter in Indianapolis, where they still somehow put up 30 points with Josh Johnson predominantly at quarterback. And then the game on Sunday, which really was an embarrassing performance. And I think where you have to look, yes, Mike White struggled. We know all about that, 4 interceptions. But the big concern for me is this defense is just getting completely run over. I mean, they're giving up 40-plus points now in 3 of the last 4 games.
Mm-hmm.
And the big problem for me is that Robert Saleh comes with a reputation as a defensive guru. Well, when you come in with that kind of reputation and you had the success you did in San Francisco as the coordinator, you expect better results. You certainly expect better effort from this defense, and we're just not seeing it. And I don't know if you happen to catch this, but I found this to be very interesting that Rex Ryan was interviewed on an ESPN radio show and kind of went off on Robert Saleh, saying basically, don't ever compare me to this guy. That I always got effort out of my defenses, even when there were injuries. And this guy, he basically called him a fraud. I mean, he didn't use that word, but
Wow.
he doesn't think too highly of him. Let's put it that way. And, Rex Ryan had his own issues, as we know. He was bombastic, and yes, he had his success, but ultimately it was a downfall that wound up costing him. But that's the problem is you watch them and just give no effort, giving up big play after big play. The Bills, I mean, I guess the game might as well have been played on another planet the week before in Jacksonville, and somehow they only scored 6 points. So you certainly expect that Josh Allen's going to do his thing, but to do it with the ease that he did in the game yesterday, I mean, this defense just does not look like a competitive unit right now. And unfortunately, we as Jet fans got too high on the Mike White train. That's what happens. The guy goes out there and throws for 400 yards. You're going to get a little too high and think he's the next franchise quarterback. He's the next Drew
You
Brees,
guys are
yada, yada,
desperate for
yada. Yeah, and they were just so desperate. And the reality is that's not what he is. It makes for a nice story for one week, but it's back to reality now, and the Jets are where they are, which is basically in the abyss.
Did you see the comments he came out and basically was like alluding to, like joking maybe a little bit that he should have been the first overall pick when he came out? Did you see
Yeah,
that?
I mean, like I get wanting to be confident, but when you make statements like that, and other things that I've heard from him made me very surprised that he made that kind of comment because he comes across as like a very humble guy. But then you make a statement like that, and it's like, yeah, it's good to have self-confidence and feel that way, but I mean, the reality is nobody puts any stock into comments like that. So I just think you're better off not making them.
Yeah, when you're given a performance that you did and going into the fourth quarter, you're losing 38-3.
Yeah.
Maybe you should keep your mouth shut for the week. And you know what? Also, this is one of these games where you look at it and it's 45-17. Wow, blowout. There was 7 total turnovers in this game. The Bills turned over twice. Obviously, the Jets turned it over 5 times. They had the Corey Davis fumble along with Mike White's 4 picks. That's not great football, even from both sides, to have 7 total turnovers. It's not something you want to watch, and you keep giving Allen a shorter field and that momentum going on. You're going to get rolled over at home, and poor people, going in there into MetLife had to watch something again. So, in your opinion, do you think there's a QB controversy here, or is Zach Wilson now after this, when he's healthy, he's starting?
I think Zach Wilson will definitely start, and the only way I would have felt that Mike White should keep the job is if he kept playing well. I mean, of course, you're not going to put up 400 yards every game, but
No.
if he wound up winning games and putting together respectable performances, and I would say, Zach Wilson hasn't done enough where you say he's the unquestioned starter, even regardless of the injury situation. You ride the hot hand in that case. And so I think it would have made for a nice story. But the fact that he wasn't able to complete the Indianapolis game, left that game early, injured, and then comes out with a stud against Buffalo, which is a very good defense. It is worth
Yes.
noting. I mean, they've shut down a lot of good offenses this year. But I think they do go back to Zach Wilson, and you hope that you get something out of him to go into year 2 expecting that he's the guy.
Yep, no, I 100% agree. And right now, it just feels like Jeff fans like yourself, like Dylan that we know out there, you guys are just you're suffering once again with, hey, you're not going to the Super Bowl, but where's the hope? Like, where's the hope that this ship is going and sailing in the correct direction? And it just feels like another regime, another new quarterback, all new players, and it's just the same old sorry Jets.
Yeah, well, I will say just quickly too,
Yeah,
let's just let this head coach have a little time
yes.
and not think about throwing him out the door. I mean, you got to give people a chance to be successful. There's a
Agreed.
lot of good qualities that Robert Saleh has. I mean, maybe he'll turn out to be a terrible coach. Maybe he'll be another Adam Gase or Todd Bowles or the litany you could go down to of past Jet head coaches who've had no success. But let's give him 2 or 3 years before we make that kind of evaluation.
No, I 100% agree, and I feel the same way about the quarterback. You got a lot more pieces there to solve. You can't make an entire cake and you're missing flour and other ingredients. It's not how it works. Just in passing, we'll talk more about this later this week. New England, we'll talk more about that later this week. Blowing out Cleveland. It is, I would say, alarm bells ringing over there in Cleveland. That is looks like a sinking ship. Tennessee, very impressive, beating a solid New Orleans team. I mean, Tennessee, you could argue there, with all the injuries they've had, including their MVP candidate in Derrick Henry for 6 to 10 weeks, they could be the best team in football. Julio Jones on the IR, doesn't matter. Keep winning.
Yeah.
Keep winning. They've beaten New Orleans, the Bills, the Chiefs, the Rams. I mean, all of these top echelon teams, so shout out to them.
But remember, somehow lost to the Jets.
Somehow lost to hey, there's parity, and at the end of the day, the team on the other side, just as we saw tonight with the Niners or any of these other things, they're paid too. The Jags the same week, last week. They're paid as well. Those are professionals, so you can't take anyone lightly. The final game, though, I really wanted to talk about a little bit in depth so we can get out of here, is the Sunday night game. I mean, we started off talking about the primetime game tonight in the Rams and the Niners. Let's talk about KC and the Raiders. We talked about some of the unfortunate things going on there with the Raiders, and that's why I wanted to just give a shout-out to Derek Carr and everything he's done even off the field, keeping this team together, never mind on the field, where I saw a lot of Raider fans just absolutely trashing him after this game and saying that Mariota should be the starter. And I'm sorry.
No.
I know I'm not a full-time 100% watcher of the Las Vegas Raiders, but I think that is insane that people are out there. That's like me calling for John Wolford to be starting over Stafford despite his piss-poor play lately. I don't know what game that they're watching that they think they would have more of a chance without Derek Carr in the lineup. But I guess more importantly to talk about, do you feel okay with the Chiefs right now? Is this a huge turning point, or is this game just a little bit of an aberration?
You know, it really is a great question to put it that way, because this has been such a strange year for the Chiefs, and that their offense has been so off kilter for so long. It's not just a week or two or different points in a game where they just don't look like they're clicking at the highest level like we saw them do for basically 2 years straight. They've had full games, week after week, where it was just like, what is going on with this team? Even in wins, they had the back-to-back wins there against the Giants and the Packers at home, and in neither game it was ugly. It was absolutely ugly, and led to a lot of questions about what's going on with Mahomes. Is he actually playing hurt? The explosive plays aren't there. Where's Tyreek Hill? The turnovers, all these things going on with the offense, and then they come out and have a game like last night, and it leads you to believe that they're definitely back. Now, I would say that I don't think one game makes them completely back, but what I will say is that the game last night on Sunday night, that looks like the Chiefs of old. That looks like what we've come to expect from them. That was vintage Mahomes, 5 touchdowns. I mean, they basically played a flawless game. I don't think they had a turnover. Travis Kelce was much more back into the mix, which he had been kind of lost.
He's had a bad season up until that point.
Right, and had a key lost fumble in the Monday Nighter against the Giants, so they got him back going early and often. They got Tyreek Hill going. It wasn't so much that many big plays up and down the field, but it just felt like they were clicking better, and that Mahomes had a better connection with the receivers. He was getting the ball out, getting his guys in space. They were making plays. It looked a lot more like the Chiefs and would lead you to believe that they're headed for a much better second half of the season. But they've shown too many flaws this year where you can't just say one game like this and boom, they're all the way back. So that would be the way I kind of feel about it.
No, I agree with that. I would say that this is good signs. To me, I would say I don't think this is a Super Bowl contender the way it currently is. A fringe playoff team. I think they'll make the playoffs. And hey, if they can get into the dance, they're a threat, right? But all this confirmed for me this week with this game and the Chargers game. I mean, the Chiefs are winning this division, right? I know
Absolutely.
there
Yeah.
was a little bit of fear there that they weren't gonna our pick of before the season as well of them in last place. We thought they were gonna be easily winning this division, but the Broncos falling off at home to the Eagles last week after their impressive win against the Cowboys. The Chiefs beating the Raiders here. The Chargers dropping another game where I know Minnesota's a fringe playoff team, but you can't be losing that at home. They're winning this division. Like we're both in agreement on that.
Oh yeah, and just the other point on the division, especially with the Chargers, I feel like that's a team that's been one of the more disappointing teams. They came in with so much promise, and Herbert's the next big stud, which we still think he is, but they've just had too many games lately where it's like, how good is this team really? I think it started with that game in Baltimore where they just got annihilated by a Ravens team that since then hasn't played all that well. And so the Chargers just don't look all the way there right now. And Denver, they another team started 3-0. It just didn't look right when you looked at the standings and saw Kansas City in fourth. It was like that can't be right. This team's too good. And here they are a couple games later and they're in first again. And as we both believe, they'll be there to stay.
Yeah, I give a shout out as well to their defense. Their defense in recent weeks has, when it was historically bad to start the season, has played really, really well. So that could be a potential huge turning point for them if Mahomes could get back to the guy that we think he is, and the guy that he certainly was last night on Sunday night. But we also, I just wanted to briefly say before we wrap this up, is the turning point of this game absolutely was in that third quarter. You get a touchdown to start it off by the Raiders. Chiefs come back down and score a touchdown. It's 24-14. The Raiders should have had a touchdown, I would say, as Derek Carr throws a beautiful pass to newly acquired Deshaun Jackson, who wanted out with the Rams. We cut him. He goes over there. I mean, I'm sure you've seen this play as the rest of America has seen this play. I forget who it was. I don't know if it was Tyrann Mathieu or someone falls down. He has a wide open 20 more yards to run into the end zone with his blazing speed. And he seems to get confused about where he is on the field or in relation to where the defenders are. And he kind of floats back to the other defender there. And forgive me because I'm not remembering who the defender was that tackled him. And he kind of floats into him and almost looks for contact and ends up getting the ball popped out. The fumble happens. The Chiefs go down the field and get a field goal. And that was basically the game. I mean, because they come back on the next drive and throw a pick. That was basically the game. I mean, what'd you make of, like, did Deshaun just get lost? I mean, did he just forget what was going on?
Well, we've seen some things with Deshaun Jackson. We've been watching him long enough now. It's amazing how long he's lasted with some of the gaffes that he's had on the field. I remember there was one where he prematurely dropped the ball before he crossed the goal line. So he's had a history of this really throughout his career. I mean, an electrifying player at times, especially in his heyday with the Eagles. But as we know, there have been some plays like that. So not completely surprised to see something like that. And immediately, too, it's like his first catch as a Raider. It's like, welcome to Vegas. You think he's got a huge play and boom, loses the ball. And yeah, that was a key play. I think you also have to look at the fake punt that Kansas City pulled off on a perfect pass from the punter Townsend to keep a drive alive. And then the other play in this game, which I'm sure you saw, it was just kind of the signature Chiefs highlight, is the Mahomes touchdown pass to Darrell Williams, where he scrambled, almost looked like he was ahead of the line of scrimmage.
He
but
did,
his
didn't he?
athleticism, yeah. And I think they pointed out on the broadcast, they were like, oh, the one thing you got to check is, was he ahead of the line? It was awfully close, but he just floated a ball up there to Darrell Williams, who's a running back, to get that deep down the field, a 38-yard, and he goes up and makes a contested catch. And it was like, that's Chiefs football. Those are the kind of plays that we see from this offense. And Williams has done a great job filling in for the injured Edwards-Helaire. Looks like he should keep the job to me as the starting running back because he's been effective.
Yeah, they ultimately, I'm of the belief that they need to run the ball more. He had 11 carries, 43 yards. It's 3.9 a clip. But out of the backfield, 9 targets, 9 catches. And as you said, that touchdown, 101 yards and a touchdown. I mean, you can't argue with that production. And as long as teams keep putting a cover 2 shell, those 2 high deep safeties, and not allowing them to attack kind of the seams of the field with players like Tyreek, hey, if they're going to give you the check downs and you could chew off 8-10 yards at a time, you can do that. You could have 9, 10 play, 12 play drives, whatever it works to make them respect the deep shot or maybe get a running game going. That's what the Chiefs have to do going here. And as you mentioned, a great fake field goal, fake play that happened. It was a fake punt, right? That ended up happening.
Yeah.
We didn't see that tonight with the fake field goal with the Rams, which I'm sure you saw.
I was going to bring that up because what a disaster that play was.
A disaster play, and I say this to the Rams and every other NFL coach out there who are never going to listen to this. But if you're a fan out here, stop with this complete devotion to analytics crap. Please, please stop and just use your head of the years of football that you've been in the game, whether watching or playing or coaching. What in your right mind, in just talking the Rams game, did you not think it would be more beneficial to try a 33-yard field goal to get some momentum at the end of the half, to get 3 points on the board, which are basically guaranteed the way, knock on wood, the way Matt Gay has been kicking the ball? To run a fake field goal there down 21-7 was, I thought, one of the most asinine plays I've seen of the season. I mean, blows my mind. And we've seen that across the league of these fake punts, these fake field goals, these going for it on 4th downs when there's absolutely no reason to. Stop with this analytics bull jive, please, for the love of God, and just use your head in the flow of the game. I mean, do you agree with me on that?
Oh, 100%. And the only other thing I want to say about that particular play is I saw a good point made by Pro Football Talk in a tweet that was like, so what happens if they convert that play? There's 10 seconds left, and they probably kick a field goal anyway. I mean, so the play just didn't make any sense.
It made no sense. I guess they thought they were somehow going to get a touchdown on that, but you don't think, as a special teams unit that has run a number of fakes, even dating back to the Jeff Fisher era, that teams are aware and watch those plays? It seemed like an insane choice to do. And FYI, you're not the Chiefs. Like, you're not any of these teams, and you take the 3 free points when you are not playing well, when you have a chance to go into the locker room down only 11, and now you're back down 14 with them getting the ball. I don't know. I mean, those are days where I wonder, God, if I could be that stupid, I could be Sean McVay on the field. I mean, I just don't understand it. I really don't. Please stop. Every team, stop. Just use your head, please. But guys, we're gonna wrap up this show 1st and 10 this week. A long one because we had a lot to catch up on. Basically missing about the last month. Thank you so much. This will be out later today on a Tuesday, so look for that, and probably about noonish or so, and we'll be back hopefully. Maybe in a couple days or so, to do some of our picks, to talk about Week 11 and where we think teams are going forward. Timestamp, as always, are in the description down below to talk about everything that we covered in this long podcast. So if you're still here at the end, as always, Brian and I greatly, greatly appreciate it. Brian, thank you so much once again, man, of sticking with me on these odd hours, these odd schedules, and doing the podcast with me, man. I greatly enjoy it, and I appreciate you.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. And I was just wondering if you were going to back out after that ugly performance by the Rams, but I think clearly you wanted to come on and vent your frustration, so I think it was somewhat therapeutic.
It absolutely was. I owed it to you just to do the podcast in general, but man, was it good to get some of those thoughts out, which, will ultimately change nothing because I'll be here in a couple weeks talking about how they lost to the Packers 33-10. So I'm sure that will be great. But guys, thank you so much. Like the video, subscribe channel, share with your friends if you be so kind. And until next 1st and 10 later this week, thanks for listening.